In the living room, the boardroom, doesn't really matter where you're at. Low emotional intelligence has a major impact on people and relationships. So today we're going to talk about how emotional intelligence affects leadership and the results that they're getting. So what is leadership, and really what's the definition of leadership? Over the last 20 some odd years, I've done a lot of leadership development, read a lot of books, watched a lot of videos. Now I could just really sum leadership into this simple definition. A job of a leader is to get results. Now how a leader gets results is really the question. In the past, a leader's been able to get results by being just smart. But today there's been a shift, a major shift. And people expect two things from their leaders. They need a leader that's both smart and human. So today we're going to focus on the human dimension and how important that is as we talk about this concept of emotional intelligence and the ability a leader has to be more human. So you probably have come here because you're wanting to understand how to be a better leader. So to do that, I always like to refer to models that I've had. So I'm sure there's been great leaders in your life. And if you could, click below and in the comment section below, capture for me what were some of the best qualities, maybe the top 2 or 3 qualities of the greatest leader that you've interacted with. The biggest problem that we're facing today in leadership is that leaders aren't accepting the fact that we necessarily need to be both smart and human. In fact, for years, they've been able to just outsource the human component, right? See, as a leader, I'm really smart, I'm focusing on the business, the results we're trying to get to, and I'll have an HR department take care of the human component for me. Or in a military environment, done a lot of work in the military, they'll have a first sergeant that takes care of the people. So that leaves the leader to just be able to be working on being smart. Doesn't work anymore. And so if you're finding yourself as a leader that is very smart but has not developed the skills to be human, then today we're going to talk about how you can begin your journey to become more human. And in the end, develop a greater sense of emotional intelligence. Probably as a leader, you're asking yourself the question, because it's worked for you pretty well over the years, why would I need to develop this idea of becoming more emotionally intelligent? Well, a lot of statistics out there that show that when it comes down to a lot of the issues that organizations are faced with, such as high turnover, employee engagement, in fact, it's a $500+ billion problem. So if dollars aren't important to you, then don't listen today. Otherwise, stay with us and let's talk about how you can become more emotionally intelligent. So I have 3 things I'm going to share with you that help you on your journey to become more emotionally intelligent. The first thing we're going to talk about is this identification of this idea of temperament. I'm going to be able to talk to you about 4 different temperaments and how those temperaments play out in a leadership role. First thing we're going to talk about is this idea of temperament. And to do that, we're going to reference a tool called the 4 lenses. It's a little kit that we use to help in identifying a person's personality or temperament. And as we end today, we're going to give you the opportunity to take a free assessment and find out what your temperament is to begin your journey. So as we begin, let's talk about the different 4 temperaments. And as I share with you basically these temperaments, just kind of sit back, listen, and see which ones you identify the most with as we go through this. And that will help you towards step 2 of this, of really identifying some low mature behaviors that you can work on to change in your life. Okay, so let's start with left brain first. Everybody's heard of left brain, right brain. There's a lot of information out there that, as human beings, we kind of divide one way or the other. On the left brain side, we're going to start with first our gold temperament. Now, our gold temperament is a person that is structured, they're organized, they like to follow rules. They're the person that when they show up and there's a line of 100 people, they become 101, right? You don't take cuts and you don't cut lines and those kind of things. When it comes to projects, they lay out projects very well, they get them done, right? And if there's 10 steps to doing a project, the gold will do all 10 steps. It's funny, I was with a group and I said, okay, so let's say you take that project, there's 10 steps, you got started, you're at step 4, and your boss comes up and says, okay, this project you're working on, we don't need it anymore. Here's the new project. What do you do? Everybody sitting at the gold table says, is we move to the next step. Because whether we're going to need it or not is not as important as we have to finish it. So golds are finishers. So that's important to know about the gold temperament, is when it comes down to it, kind of the key words to understand about the golds are they value order and structure. The other left brain is this idea of the green temperament that we refer to it as. And the green temperament, as you can see possibly on the cards here, They're about knowledge. They're about gaining knowledge. They're highly competent in what they choose to do in their lives. They're driven through life about personal competence, wanting to be the best they can be, wanting to do the best they can be. And what's interesting about them is that no matter how good a job they do, they don't really listen to what you have to say about it. I mean, I can come up to somebody that has the green preference and say, man, that was a great job you did the other day. And they'll just kind of look at me and go, because in their mind, I have no idea how many things are actually wrong with it. So they're very critical, self-critical, almost perfectionists. Wonderful people to have in the world, but from a leadership perspective, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls that the green might also have. Now we get to the right brain temperament. We have this temperament called, let's do this one first. It's our blue temperament. So this is the temperament that has to do with people and relationships. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, a lot of what we talk about in emotional intelligence comes from the blue temperament. It's about communicating. It's about listening. It's about understanding. And what's really interesting that we find Myers-Briggs has done some research around temperaments. And usually about 65% of leaders that emerge in the leadership of companies and organizations, about 65, almost 70% of the leaders end up being highly left brain leaders. So what are they missing? We talked about, leaders are very smart, but they're missing the human component. That's really the blue, what we're talking about. They bring this blue, this relationship and human component into our world. Wonderful people, again, need them, need to have them as part of our lives. And then the last temperament for you to consider is this idea of the orange temperament. Now, the orange temperament strives for what we call this ability of just to be free, right? The ability to do what I want, when I want, how I want. Don't pigeonhole me into a block, put me in a specific job and expect me to do that one job. That won't work for an orange. They need the ability to express themselves and to grow and progress. They're the problem solvers of the world. They really enjoy the challenges when they're faced of how to overcome something. Now, just a real kind of a side note is we look at these temperaments. Orange is the opposite of gold. It's important to understand that as a leader, because if you're a high gold leader and you happen to interact with somebody that has a high orange preference, chances are you're going to struggle. That relationship isn't going to be what it needs to be because neither one is really understanding what the other one needs. The blue and the green temperament are exact opposites. And a lot of green leaders get very, very frustrated with blue employees or other blue leaders because the blues want to engage in a conversation. They want to know what's happening in their lives. And the green is like, unless I need information from you, can you just not come into my office? And so it's one of those situations where we have a lot of conflict that comes as we look at the differences between the two temperaments, or the four temperaments, in fact. So that's a basic overview of the four temperaments. Don't know which one you are? Click below, take our free assessment, and find out as you begin your journey of which is going to be your temperament. Now, step 2 of this process is once I understand what my temperament is, now let me understand how am I showing up? How am I showing up from my temperament's perspective? And am I even aware of it? Because when we talk about conflict and leadership and my inability as leader to get results, it really comes down to this, is that in most cases, I'm not even aware of how I'm showing up and the impact that I'm having, my temperament is having on those that I lead. So step 2 is this idea of emotional maturity and how that plays out in my ability as a leader. If you'd like to crash course on emotional maturity and what it is, click here and watch this video. That'll give you a good understanding of this concept that we're going to talk about right now about maturity. So now as we talk about this emotional maturity or the lack thereof, there are specific behaviors that are unique to each temperament. And what's interesting about these behaviors is that they're observable. You'll know when you're doing these behaviors and others know when you're doing these behaviors. And I can tell you that always, always, always when a low mature behavior is present, it's having a negative impact on the relationships and the people, which ultimately have an impact on the results that you're trying to get. So to understand a little bit better about what this emotional maturity looks like, in fact, and what low emotional maturity looks like, or low mature behaviors, let me just talk to you a little bit about from each of these cards, give you some ideas of what low maturity looks like. So from a green perspective, low mature behavior looks like arrogance. Have you ever come across somebody that no matter what they're doing, it just seems like you can never be good enough? And they become very prideful. It's my way or the highway. I put the work, I put the effort into it. You don't put work and effort into it. And so thus, we need to do what I'm doing. We need to follow what I'm following. Another behavior is that they're very judgmental. They begin to place more value on what they've created than what you've created. So what you really need to look at is if you happen to be a leader that has a green preference, you need to be asking yourself the question, do I exhibit any of these behaviors? And if I do, what is the impact that that's having on my ability to get results? Next, let's talk about the gold. What does it look like for low mature behaviors from a gold perspective? Golds become control freaks. You've probably seen it. Doesn't matter what's happening, they have to be in control. They have to be directing what's happening. Even in the sense, I was in the military for 27 years, and I can't tell you how many times that I would go on an assignment somewhere, and some leader who was designated as a leader felt like they had to control everything that was going on, and they ended up not listening to the people that were well seasoned, that had been there, had done it 100 times. They just could not release the control. Another idea that the golds is they basically lack flexibility. If we said we're going to do it this way, then we're doing it this way. Even if you find that while you're doing it that way, you're going to run into a lot of problems that you could do it somewhere else, it doesn't really matter. We said we're going to do it this way, and this is how it's going to be done. They have this statement, golds, that probably the best way I can describe a low mature gold would be this statement, it's my way or the highway. Or there's a right way and a wrong way to do something, and my way is the right way. So those are all low mature behaviors from a gold perspective. Same concept now. If you happen to have the gold as your primary temperament, then ask yourself the question, do you exhibit any of those behaviors? And if you do, what is the impact that that's having on the people that you're leading? Let's talk about the blue temperament. What would be some low mature behaviors from the blue temperament? I've done this hundreds of times with groups of people, and every time we have the blue group sitting there and we do this exercise of make a list of low mature behaviors, they really struggle with that because they don't see that they actually exhibit any low mature behaviors. It's kind of funny because that's actually a low mature behavior. When we finally get the group and we start talking about it, is that because how could it be low mature to care more about other people? Well, it depends. If caring more about other people gets in the way of caring about other people, right? And so one of the things that the blues do when they find themselves in a leadership role is they either play too big or they play too small. What does that mean? Had one leader that did a lot of work in hospitals. I was a hospital administrator in my military career. And the nurses filled this role quite a bit, where they would find themselves as great nurses, caring, compassionate, high blue in their personal temperament. And they would move into a leadership role. And they would feel like that was a weakness. And so they would literally shut that part of their personality down and become literally almost a nightmare to work with, because they felt like people would take advantage of them if they were too nice or too kind. Or they would also then choose to just be way, way kinder and way nicer, because that's what a great leader would do. And then people would walk all over them and people would take advantage of that. So it's a low mature behavior that has an impact either way, right? Playing too small or too big. Another one is that they also basically they give in emotionally to others, right? So somebody that comes in really strong, maybe a high gold comes in very strong, or a high green comes in really strong, the blue will just kind of just sit back and go, okay, they just take it. That's a low mature behavior. And if you're a leader and that's happening, then people are seeing you as not being the leader, right? And so that's how that low mature behavior impacts. Then the final temperament, the orange temperament, we talk about low mature behaviors. Best way I can describe this is that it's all about me, baby. In the end of the day, from an orange perspective, we're going to do what we need to do as long as it meets my needs, and not really care necessarily about you or anybody else. So it's a very self-centered. We're talking about not oranges per se. I want to be careful here. We're not talking about that as generally oranges. We're talking about low mature behaviors, and that's critical for all of these. Because if we've described all of these behaviors, they're all low mature behaviors. They are not describing the temperament that we've talked about. And probably the last thing that I'd point out from the orange perspective is that they live in the moment. They rule by their gut. So that becomes very stressful for people. I had one example is a very high orange leader was in charge, and the person in the military below them, so as an officer in charge and enlisted below them, and so the enlisted person as a high gold wanted organization, they wanted structure, they wanted to know what to do. And the orange was just like, it just depended on every day was different. And that became very, very stressful for the person that needed to have that organization and structure. So in every one of these instances, the question is that it depends on what your temperament is, but more importantly, are you operating from a high mature or low mature behavior? Which leads us to number 3, and the real reason why we've had this conversation, that you as a leader need to understand a couple key components. First, what is your temperament? Are you aware of that? Not have you taken a personality test. That's not what we're talking about. Do you really understand and are you self-aware of what your temperament is? And then 2, can you recognize low mature behaviors that are unique to your temperament that you're exhibiting on a regular basis? After you've done those 2 things, then the third step of this now is that then to pick one of those low mature behaviors and begin to work on eliminating that. And I grow in my emotional maturity through the elimination of low mature behaviors. So that's the key. Identify, become self-aware. 2, identify what low mature behaviors are currently present that might be impacting my ability to get the results that I want to get. And 3, then pick one of those behaviors and begin to work on it. And as you do, you'll begin to see relationships at home and work, and particularly, will all be impacted because of the change that you are engaging in. So to begin your journey with us today, click below and take your free assessment and understand what your temperament is, and then begin to work on closing the gap between low mature behaviors and high mature behaviors. So you can join us and help us on our journey of putting the human back into humanity.